Is it possible to have like a vulnerable narcissistic culture or a highly insecure
Oh
culture or
yeah.
something like that? Are we in
Well,
one?
hello, this Gen, whatever this Gen is called now, Z. Yeah. I think we're living in the age of vulnerable narcissism. I, I,
Okay,
I
wow.
I've yeah, I've said that before. Whereas I think in the 80s, the self-esteem movement shifted in to the grandiose narcissism
Yeah.
age. Now I think it's shifted into a vulnerable narcissism age. There was a time, where young kids felt entitled to everything because they felt in my high self-esteem, I'm better. I praise me. I get the award. I want the trophy. I deserve the trophy because I'm better than everyone else. But now everyone wants the trophy because they're a person of color or their gender or their whatever sort of intersectionality wheel it is, victimhood or suffering. That means I deserve a greater piece of the pie. I think you really are seeing that now. Now I recognize what I'm saying might be controversial, and you might not want to touch what I said with a 50-inch pole, but I think that's the truth.
This question of like grandiosity, and yes, it's true. Like there are definitely people who will hear what you just said and react viscerally without necessarily thinking through the reactions, right? I mean, we
Yeah.
live in a world of increasingly subcategories of people, each of whom are claiming some degree of preeminence of. And as a side note, I mean, the thing about intersectionality, and for those who are not steeped in academic jargon, it's the idea of, so my cynical way of describing intersectionality is that no one could agree about whether race, gender, class, or all these things was the primary negative motive cause of history, and so we'll just all agree that it's all of them.
Mm.
That's my brief and not so pithy explanation of intersectionality. But the question about like grandiosity and culture, right? You could argue that the United States in particular, and the British Empire in the 19th century, any great imperial state, right, has been fueled by its own self-delusion and grandiosity, which has both allowed it to do great harm to others, but it's also fueled it to push the boundaries of scientific innovation and creativity and change, right? So it's like, how do you, when you aggregate this to a collective level, right? How do you separate out? This is a little like Emma's question before about, is it all bad to be, is all dark triad dark in its consequences? How do you separate out? We seem to celebrate heroically grandiose narcissistic figures who have either created states
Great
or.
point, Zachary. Really great point. We do. No, I mean, we don't celebrate them. We elect them into office. I mean, it's not like we just celebrate. We make decisions that put them in positions of power. But also, look, they're more. Research shows they're more attractive for mates, at least at first, and then you get to about the 9-month mark of dating, and the person, the narcissistic spell breaks, and you're like, holy shit, I'm with an actual asshole, not someone who's charming and amazing. But so there is something within us that is attracted to people with supreme confidence because we want more of that ourselves. So we align ourselves and try to be close to it as much as possible, thinking it'll rub off on us in some way. But what often tends to happen is they really exploit us, and use us, and we find out someday that our dream that it'll rub off on us and we'll become more confident, actually leads to a situation where we've been taken advantage of and we're the schmuck, or that's how we feel. So I think that's the reality of the matter. I'm dropping some truth bombs on you guys today. I assume that's what you wanted. That's why you invited me on the podcast.
Of course. I mean, I think it's really interesting to talk about this also in relation to like trauma culture. Um, I'm always caught in this tension between it really, on the one hand, is helpful, like all these like pop psychologists on Instagram talking about trauma. There's a lot of ideas that have had that have been personally helpful to me. On the other hand, like if a Walmart person talks about their trauma, I'm just gonna like I jump out the window. Uh, am I alone
Absolutely.
here?
Oh no, that's the topic of my next book.
Do you want to give us somewhat of a preview?
Well, I haven't announced it or talked about it yet anywhere, but that's a major theme of my next book, I should say. Look, there's a difference between experiencing trauma in your life and hashtag trauma.
Mm.
What I want to take on is hashtag trauma. People who feel the need to stay and wallow within their self-pity, so that they can get as much attention as possible from their social media friends, and get clout over it, is a whole different story. The research actually shows an interesting, and I wrote about this for Psychology Today, zero correlation between those who are actually highly sensitive people, and score high on HSP scales, and high sensitivity signalers. High sensitivity signalers are people who they're not actually highly sensitive, but they signal in every situation like, oh my God, I can't deal with that, or I need to get out of that thing, or that homework is too hard for me because I'm a highly sensitive person. um, those people tend to score high in the dark triad traits.
Interesting.
Mm. So that's
Hmm.
the deal with that. The highly sensitive signalers are also
Signalers,
Machiavellian and
they tend to be. They tend to be.
psychopathic.
Most people who've gone through legitimate trauma don't want to talk about it incessantly. I have a lot of compassion, of course, for, I don't want to sound like and come across here like I don't have a compassion. People who've gone through horrible, terrible things, there is a process to help them heal and to move forward with their lives. But most of those people don't enjoy constantly ruminating and talking about it on social media. They don't do it in a way where they're like, "Hey everyone, look at me. I've had trauma. Aren't you so proud of me?" It doesn't make any sense. Yeah.
I mean, the reality is, right. Anything that happens to any of our loved ones and friends is deeply impactful to us, right? Our subset of us. If my mother has cancer, if my children have struggles, that's a major issue. But it is not a major issue for others other than us, right? It's like my trauma is a major issue for me. To expect it to be a major issue for someone else is a stretch. To expect some compassion if it comes up is something else entirely.
What
But
a
I think there
fascinating.
is there is a fetishizing of trauma collectively that look, these things may be cultural pendulums insofar as things that have
Hmm.
been ignored and neglected, which is excessive in one direction, then gets excessively attended to in another. And you
Hmm.
use the Kantian imperative, we could use the Hegelian imperative. Maybe this is all just human beings in a continual state of Hegelian evolution. We have a thesis, and then we have an antithesis, and then we have a synthesis, and then that becomes it's like a thing. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, a lot of related to this is the idea of triggering, and I have said on social media, and it pisses off a lot of people. Your triggers are your responsibility. You can't expect that everyone should tiptoe around you and mind read all of your traumas and all of your past history of triggers. You have to take a certain sense of responsibility for for changing your environment in ways like you are all the one with the knowledge of what triggers you. So I don't like this idea of like let's say someone gets triggered over something, they're like, and then they blame it on someone else, and say, I was traumatized, don't, I shouldn't have to do that, or you shouldn't look at me that way, or you shouldn't have said that to me. I'm triggered. There's a certain sense of responsibility, I think, that people aren't taking in this trauma obsessed and trauma blamed. So people are blaming everything on their traumas. It down to like, I have back pain. Oh, I read the body keeps the score, so my back pain must have to be related to that time when I was 3 years old, and whatever happened to me. People, it's really out of control, and it's out of control in a way that's not in line with the science. A lot of the science shows that there's a lot of things that we do with trauma that it is really just a narrative. Trauma, they're traumatizing situations. They're all there are potentially traumatizing situations, PTSs, or experiences, PTEs, potentially traumatizing experiences. But it doesn't mean, the trauma is the narrative, and how you've interpreted it, and how you in your memory of it. And just memory is not a direct recollection of anything. It's reconstruction. It's a reconstruction from everything we know in cognitive science. So there's a lot of nuance here that I just think gets lost on hashtag trauma.
Yeah, I mean, people are really reactive about this issue. Like, I shared a piece from Freddie Dubois in our Progress Network newsletter recently, and
Mm.
I've only ever gotten as heated a reaction to something when I
Mm.
questions, some impact of climate change. That was also
Mm.
during the pandemic, so I think people were feeling a little bit stir crazy. But yeah, I was kind of shocked. They were like, "You are not taking seriously." This person is punching down on people with trauma, and I was like, "I don't think they're punching down on people with trauma. I think that we're just
Mm.
losing in pop culture the ability to get beyond this."